Right, very good morning, dear students. Very happy to see you guys. Yeah, I'm happy to see all of you here on this very platform. I hope all of you are taking this corona break very seriously, indulging in uh, a lot of learning that's happening in your classes, maintaining all the health and hygiene instructions that is being given to you by the authorities. Yeah, uh, proper washing of hands. Yeah, I'm sure you're doing it. And then use of sanitizers, wearing masks, and also maintaining a lot of social distance. Right? I'm sure all of you are doing it. And uh, well, I'm going to be talking to you about trade blocks in international business. Okay, so that was just the safety precaution. I thought I will use this to drive home a point. All right, coming into international business, just as always, I want to recap what we've done so far. If you've seen in those roughly 1.5 months of classes that we had, we started with international business and we spoke about the importance of how companies and countries will gain and benefit out of international business. And secondly, we spoke about how what factors influence the growth of businesses for various countries. And one point that I was, uh, emphasizing very emphatically was the fact that it's always better for countries to do business with their neighboring countries because that's where there's a lot of geographical proximity and there's a lot of political understanding, there's a lot of economic similarities, a lot of cultural similarities. So most countries tend to do international business, right, with their neighboring countries. And secondly, we spoke about how globalization has a very important role to play in fostering international business among various companies and countries around the world. Third aspect, we spoke about Bartlett and Goshal's model of how a firm starts off as a domestic company and then goes on to become an international company and then goes on to become a multinational corporation, a transnational corporation, then finally establishes itself as a global organization having a spread in more than about 150 or 200 countries of the world, right? And as they do this, as they use the Bartlett and Goshal's stages of globalization to enter into international business, they use four different orientations: the ethnocentric orientation, the regiocentric orientation, the polycentric orientation, and the geocentric orientation. It's called the EPRG: the ethnocentric, polycentric, regiocentric, and the geocentric. Right? So four orientation that enables them to use a particular method or a strategy by which they can enter into international business. Right? And what are the stages? What are the set of steps that the firm is going to take? First of all, assessing your business environment and then being able to look for opportunities in international business, to look for opportunities in other countries where you have firms and customers having very similar taste and preferences, and that automatically goes on to become an opportunity. There are two ways by which you can do it. As I said, there is a systematic approach by which a firm on its own volition goes outside, does its own international research, identifies markets, identifies segments, then identifies potential firms and customers with whom they can do business, and then they come back and then formulate their business strategies. Secondly, you got to identify which particular entry strategy are you going to take. If at all you take that decision to go on to go on to do business internationally, which mode of entry are you going to take? Right, as I told you that exporting is the most easiest form of entering into international business because it's least risky and it has very less of investment in terms of resources that you will have to make. And the most uh, riskier or the most deep investment strategy would be that of a wholly owned subsidiary. So there are a lot of options that come in between exporting and a wholly owned subsidiary. You can start with exporting, then you can set up a sales subsidiary, then you can issue licenses to firms in those particular countries. You can enter into joint ventures, you can have mergers and acquisitions, and then ultimately you can decide to set your business up in that particular country, wherein you go on to become a wholly owned subsidiary where you make 100% foreign direct investment in that particular country. Third, you're going to formulate your marketing mixes. Once you are able to know your opportunities, you are able to know what entry mode you are going to take. The third thing would be to formulate the right type of international marketing mixes. What is your international product strategy going to be? What is your pricing strategy going to be? Keeping your international competition and the dynamics of globalization and international business in mind. And thirdly, what's your distribution or your supply chain strategy going to be? And finally, how are you going to promote, sell, and market your goods successfully in those markets? And the fourth thing is, once you have established your business, implemented your international marketing strategy, then you go about sustaining your business, trying to ensure that you are continuing to do what you set out to do, and you're looking forward to reap the benefits of international business. So there are two methods, as I told you. One is a systematic. You go out on your own and you do all of these four stages. The reactive approach is where you are solicited by a foreign firm or a foreign customer who gets to hear about you or gets to know that you are in India selling a product or a service like this, and they want to do international business with you. Right. So we were looking at all of this, and in all of this, the pestle framework becomes very, very important because internationally you understand the dynamics of the forces in international business are largely governed by the forces in the business environment, the political environment, the economic, the socio-cultural, technological, the legal environment becomes absolutely important. The coronavirus pandemic in itself is a classic example of how globalization of a certain epidemic or a pandemic has disturbed the entire world, and it has upset the working patterns of all these different countries. And today almost all the countries are in a lockdown. Something that started in an industrial city called Wuhan in China has today spread across to all the countries of the world. So you can understand how closely all these firms, all of these countries are interconnected, and how if something happens in one part of the world gets largely disturbs and definitely has a large impact over all the different countries of the world, right? So with that introduction, I want to get into the next topic that I'm going to present to you. This is called the trade blocks. What's the role of trade blocks in international business, right? So all of you can understand a block is nothing but a large chunk. So here we're talking about a group of countries coming together and forming a large chunk. One of the things that I've always told you in international business is always better for you to do business with those countries that are in closer proximity geographically. Your neighboring countries become your first set of trading partners. And if you see, as we go in the latter part of the presentation, you will see trade blocks are mostly with these countries that are closer in proximity. Okay, so let's see what trade blocks would mean for us in the long run. These are a group of countries geographically in closer in proximity, geographically close to each other. Secondly, group of these countries decide that they want to become a part of a trade bloc, and they constitute a trade bloc, right? And once they constitute a trade bloc, they're going to have similar trading policies between them. So they're going to be a group, and the group will have a common norm or will have a common economic policy to govern how they're going to do business between themselves. Thirdly, once they come together, automatically there is mutual optation or cooperation and collaboration between them, and there will definitely be a free flow of business in terms of a natural flow of goods and services between these countries. Right. Another interesting thing that the trade bloc has as part of its characteristic is once these member countries come together and they formulate a trade bloc, they're going to have a common policy between them. Right. So between them, they'll have a common policy. Right. And when these countries will have to deal with other countries out of the bloc, they will have an external economic policy with them as to how they're going to deal with the countries which are not part of the trade bloc. So going on, if you see this particular uh, slide, you will see there is a particular transition in which a particular country gets into international business, and then how they operate as part of a trade bloc, right? So they first start with a preferential trade agreement, countries coming together and have a preferential trade agreement. Second, they move on to have a free trade agreement. Third, they move on to become a common market. Fourth, they go on to become a customs union. Fifth, they go on to become an economic union, right? So let's see what these different stages or different types of trade blocks are in parlance today. So we have a preferential trade area, right? A preferential trade area is where a particular country decides that it wants to have a preferential or a favoritism oriented strategy with certain countries which are part of the trade bloc. Now, what they necessarily will do here is they will lower the tariff and the non tariff barriers between these countries, and so that's where they're giving preferences. So if any good is going to come from this particular country which is part of my, which is a member in the trade bloc, we will have a lesser tariff and we will have a lesser non-tariff barrier for goods that are entering our country, and then goods that are going to go from our country to those countries. The second stage of a trade bloc, right, is the free trade area. Free trade area is where these member countries are going to eliminate all internal trade barriers between themselves. So there are no trade barriers between them, but they will maintain an external tariff and non-tariff barrier with other countries which are out of the trading bloc, right? Third stage. So these are all gradual stages. So you can start with a preferential trade agreement and then slowly graduate or move on to have a free trade area with the members in your trade bloc. Third, you can have a customs union. Now, what happens in a customs union is you eliminate all your internal barriers, all your tariff and non tariff barriers between the countries in the trade bloc. Second, you will have a common external barrier, which is a common tariff and a common non tariff barrier with countries that are outside your trade bloc. Fourth is where you can go on to become a common market. What happens in a common market? You eliminate all tariff and non-tariff barriers with all the member countries in your trade bloc. You will have a common external economic policy with all the member countries that are outside, and there will be free flow of goods and services, which is labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and all of these aspects can easily move. Resources get easily moved between these countries. There are no borders or there are no barriers that restricts the free movement of resources between these member countries. That's where you call a common market, which is a common market, a group of five countries. So you can buy and sell anything within these five countries which are members or signatories of your trade bloc. The next transition would be to become an economic union. Economic union is a trade bloc of a very serious nature, and it has very serious business as well. What are the characteristics of an economic union? They will, as I said, eliminate all tariff and non-tariff barriers between the members within the within the trading bloc. Secondly, they will set up an external barrier. They will have a common tariff and non-tariff barrier for all the goods that are going to come from those countries which are outside the trade bloc. And third, there will be free movement of labor, capital, and entrepreneurial resources within these countries. Fourth is they'll have a common economic policy. They will have a common economic agenda that's going to decide how these countries are going to decide how they will operate as a trade bloc. And those common economic policies, a charter of uh, terms and conditions by which they will govern, is what will decide economic policy. And very interestingly, once they have a common economic policy that's going to govern how all of these countries are going to do business between themselves and with other countries which are outside the trade bloc, they will also necessarily have a common currency between themselves. So they will have a common currency, and that common currency is going to be used for all international trading transactions that's going to take place between these member countries. And the last of it is called the full economic integration, which is a step above, which goes on to become a political union as such. But we've seen only the United States uh, play that role to a little extent, but not a full integration as we can say. So these are the different types of trade blocks that exist in today's world, and different countries when they come together and when they negotiate and they look at what is good for themselves, what's good for the other member countries which are part of the trade bloc, then they decide what is good and then they opt for any of these as such. So that's the way in which they're going to graduate, as I told you. So that's why this particular slide has been very importantly put over there. So as I've told you at the beginning, that every firm operates in the domestic market, And we begin with this policy of protectionism, where the government of the country decides to ensure that all the uh, companies and all the entrepreneurs within the country are protected from foreign competition, and so they naturally guard their country through the protectionist policy, right? This is like the pre-liberalization stage, where you're not allowing any foreign companies, foreign countries, foreign influences to have anything to do with your country. So you're an independent economy. You're operating within the domestic borders of your country. When you get into international business, on the Bartlett and Goshal model, so from a domestic company, you go on to become an international company. So your country will enter into preferential trade agreements with certain friendly countries in its neighborhood, and they have a preferential trade agreement, which says they have a certain for certain products and services they will have a lesser tariff, and they will not have non-tariff barriers, or they will not have quota restrictions for any volume of goods that's going to come from each of these markets. So they can set up a preferential trade agreement. And once the preferential trade agreement and is very successful, and the country starts reaping a lot of benefits in international business, that's when they start setting up a free trade area. So from a free trade area, they go on to have a customs union. So they start having a common economic policy. And from there, they can go on to become a common market, where buying and selling anything between these members becomes easily available. There are no borders and there are no barriers. And anybody and everybody in those member countries can sell, which is, if you have five countries that are part of a trading bloc, then you can buy and sell in any of the five countries of the world, right? And then you go on to become a monetary union, which is an economic union. You have a single currency. Then you become a fiscal union, so you have common economic policies, and largely you go on to become a political union, which is still not, it's just something that we've not seen. Political union is where five countries come together and they have a common government, which is something that we don't see in reality. What we see in reality is countries coming together and having an economic union to a large extent, having a solo currency operating the transactions between them, and then each of them. I mean, they all have a common economic policy, but they have something called political sovereignty. Political sovereignty is each country elects its own government, and the government decides what is good for its people, right? So, and there is no common government for four or five countries in a particular trade bloc as such. So that's where these transitions go on, and that's how a particular company grows into international business. So these are the examples of a different trade blocks that I just spoke about. Examples of free trade area would be your NAFTA, North American Free Trade Area. Then you have SARC. Customs Union would be CACM from Central America. And then you'll have a common market, which is the OPEC cartel that operates the uh, petrol exporting countries trade bloc. Then you have an economic union, which is the classic example of that is the European Union, which is an amazing case of economic union having a common uh, economic policy and also having a common currency and naturally controlling a large part of the trade in the world. And these are examples that you can see how where the trade blocks are spread across almost all the countries you can see. And if, as I told you, the very interesting part is trade blocks happen with countries that are closer in proximity. So you can see trade blocks, those different colors that you see on the screen for those different countries represent. Like, for example, you see NAFTA, which is North American Free Trade Area. You have three countries there. You have Canada, you have United States of America, and you have Mexico coming together, and they have they form a trade bloc. And you have Mercosur, which is all the Latin American countries. They come together. There is a Caribbean cooperation community. All the Caribbean islands, the West Indies, and the islands around that particular region come together to become a trade bloc. ASEAN, you will find all the Southeast Asian countries, all of that you see in that light blue area, Cambos, Laos, Indonesia, Cambodia, all of those countries that come there. And SARC, you will have all these countries that are part of the South Asian regional cooperation, where India is a very significant member. So the point in place is that trade blocks usually are established by countries which are closer in proximity. And since there is a lot of friendly understanding and cooperation between these countries, it's easier for them to establish a trade bloc and continue to do business and have friendly terms in terms of economic transactions through exports and imports in the long run. What are the features of a trade bloc? Uh, Becoming a member of a trade bloc is very volunteer in character. Nobody can force a country to become a part of the trade bloc. Secondly, these becoming a member of a trade bloc and deciding terms and conditions are through mutual negotiation with the other members. Thirdly, as I said, most trade blocs have regional characteristics because you're doing business with those countries that are closer in proximity, and since they all belong to a particular region, so there is a lot of regional characteristics. And since you have regional characteristics, you understand what works well in a given geographical region. Fourth is divisions are based on political considerations, which is though they are members of the trade bloc, still political sovereignty and then political maneuverism is very much over there because politically every country wants to ensure the supremacy and have a strong control over its own country and not have any other country to dictate terms to their country. So politically they are strong, but economically they come together to see that sort of unity. And the fifth important feature of a trade bloc is that it is existent because it has benefits. It has mutual benefits, and so no country in the world can stay exclusive and say that they can do business on their own because, as I said, no country in the world is self-sufficient, and no company and no country can say that I will not do business by not and not have any sort of interaction or relationship with any other country. So it's a win-win kind of a situation for all of them who are part of the trade bloc, and all of them who are part of international business. What are the objectives of a trade bloc? Yes, these are some of the interesting objectives with which the member countries work together to establish a trade bloc. The primary objective is to reduce tariff and non tariff barriers between the member countries and make export and import freely moving through between these countries. Secondly, to maintain better relationships, friendly bilateral relationships with these countries, so that at any given point of time you are in trouble, your member countries will definitely be able to reach out. Third is to impose common barriers among non-members. To say that since we are part of a group, preference is given to the countries which are part of a group. So anything you want to buy and sell, you got to buy and sell within the group, and you cannot have a. I mean, you can have business with non-member countries of the trade bloc, but that will be governed by other sort of tariffs and non-tariffs, which are slightly higher than what is usually applicable for countries in the trade bloc. Fourth, it promotes free movement of labor, capital, and other factors of production. And when they become a customs union and when they become when they become an economic union, you can create this opportunity or scope for you to create a common currency like the euro, and you can have a central bank like the European Bank. And collective bargaining is also possible because trade blocs can negotiate with non-member countries for a better tariff and non-tariff deal, and and they can assist each other during a time of a crisis or during a time when certain member countries have issues or difficulties. They can always seek out for help, and the member countries in the trade bloc will definitely give them the necessary assistance that they require. Enhancing welfare of consumers in these countries, so firms and the consumers will tend to benefit when they get affordable products and services and affordable factors of production for companies that are into B2B, and customers getting quality products through the B2C channel, because something is more advantageous and something is a lot more cheaper and affordable in member countries. So that's a big benefit that you see. And then it generates a lot of healthy competition between them, and there's mutual give and take. It's a positive sum game. So where member countries tend to gain by doing business with each other, it's a win-win that happens, and it promotes higher employment. So wherever in these countries you have an opportunity to work because of the demand for labor and the supply of labor equations, then automatically eligible candidates and employees will be able to go to these member countries and work and seek the benefit of what they want to do uh, by what the trade bloc has established. So, what are the positive effects? Yes, these are some of the benefits that a trade bloc gives you. There's economic integration, there's cooperative spirit. Markets get expanded, so you can tend to sell beyond your domestic borders, and you can go into those countries which are part of your trade bloc. There's growth and development of a region. Collectively, we all grow, and the region becomes, economically viable. The region becomes standard of living of people in that particular region increases. You have uniform policies, so there's not much of confusion when you have to trade between member countries. There's increased volume of trade. Your balance of trade situations can improve largely because you're exporting greater than what you can import. And then product and market development can very easily take place. So products uh, that reach maturity in your markets can easily find a market elsewhere in any of these countries. So you have a big market scope for your product and your market to sell your wares in any part of these countries that are part of the trade bloc, and benefits consumers in the member countries because they become eligible for availing best quality products and services that come from any of these member countries. There's free transfer of resources and factors of production as such. Um, Along with that, we also will talk about the negative effects of trade blocks. Yes, since you have a common external barrier, so uh, it's like you are hard pressed and you're forced only to buy and sell with member countries which are part of the trade bloc. And even if you get a very good deal from outside a country that's outside out of your trade bloc, it automatically restricts. So that creates a lot of difficulties for international business because you don't have the freedom, and your freedom is very restricted to do business only with those firms which are part of your trade bloc. There's absence of collective bargaining, and it affects competition also uh, because you're very much you're like the birds of the same flock working together in the same trade bloc, and does not give you the necessary scope to go outside your trade bloc and sell and buy and then expand and extend your scope, get that greater exposure that you want when you get into international business. That's when you will very much be a regional player, right? And being a part of the trade bloc very often will become a barrier for you in growing and becoming an international player, or in growing and becoming a global player, right? So trade bloc often uh, is the barrier. And there are very high tariffs that you establish with other countries outside. So you will naturally be losing out because of high tariffs. You will never be able to do business. And you have import restrictions because your country obviously will say you will have to export to these countries. So these countries in the trade bloc are the ones that you should give preference to. And then only later you will have to deal with other countries. Even if there is a huge demand that's coming from a country that's outside your trade bloc, you're restricted because you're a member of the trade bloc. And there's loss of political sovereignty because once you're part of the trade bloc, then very often what happens is collectively you take decisions, and collective decision making sometimes hampers your political freedom, your political sovereignty, and sometimes you will have to sacrifice the interests of your people for something larger, right? So if you look at the backdrop of the Brexit issue, the backdrop of the Brexit is precisely the point that will explain to you on loss of political sovereignty, because Britain, for a very large period of time, people within the country felt that Great Britain seems to be indulging too much in the affairs of the economic union and contributing more funds to the development of the other member countries in the economic union, and the natives who are part of UK, the consumers of UK, began to suffer, and that's the reason why the Brexit happened, and then what do you say? The rest is history, and so we see the fallout of this negative factor for Brexit and for Great Britain. So, what are the what does it do to intra-regional trade? So, the moment you constitute a trade bloc, then what happens is business happens between those countries which are part of the region, and then you are promoting what's called intra-regional trade. So when that happens, you automatically will see these benefits. So removal of trade barriers, and this transfer of labor and capital and other factors of production become easily mobile between the countries that are part of your trade union. There can be uniform political and economic policies in the long run. You can have close relationship between the countries that are part of this particular union. and then transport and other infrastructure facilities can be jointly developed so that we can create a larger infrastructure and create that regional cooperation. And you can have common external barriers with non-member countries so that you tend to have a regional collective bargaining, and you tend to give preference to countries that are part of a region, and that leads to regional development. And then lastly, you can have a common economic policy, because ultimately it is the countries that are closer in proximity geographically, those who are close to each other, are the ones who will be able to reach out to you when you are in trouble or in difficulty or in need, rather than anybody else who is far away, away geographically, and will definitely find it very difficult to do business with you as such. So, well, this is the first part of the video. So here we've seen the role of a trade block, and the positive and the negative effects that a trade block has. So in the next part of the video, I will be explaining to you about the different trade blocks that we have in the world, and how these trade blocks have been influencing international business, and the type of countries that are part of this particular union, part of the trade bloc, and how it has fostered international business in the long run, right? So all of that I will be explaining to you in the second part of the video.